The rain tapped gently against the old window panes of the gallery, a sound Isabel had grown to love. She stood by the front counter, staring out into the cobbled street of their sleepy village in Wiltshire, her hands cradling a chipped teacup once belonging to her late mother. The warmth of the tea did little to ease the chill in her chest. The gallery was silent except for the ticking of the antique clock behind her. Every frame, every sculpture in the room whispered stories of generations past, curated with care by Aunt Rosalind, and now by Isabel. To outsiders, it was merely an art gallery. But for Isabel, it was a sanctuary. A place filled with memories, with meaning. It had been 3 weeks since Aunt Rosalind passed away in her sleep. The funeral had been quiet, as she had wanted. No grand speeches, no formalities. Just a simple farewell for a woman who lived with elegance and discretion. Isabel had wept quietly beside the gravestone, clutching a sealed envelope Rosalind had given her days before her death. "You'll know when to open it, my dear," Rosalind had said with a tired smile. "Not too soon. Let the dust settle first." Isabel hadn't dared to break the seal. Not yet. Something in her heart urged her to wait. The sudden chime of the gallery door jolted her from her thoughts. A familiar perfume floated in, sweet, expensive, and utterly out of place. Isabel's eyes narrowed as she turned around. "Darling cousin," said Madeline with a saccharine smile. "Still playing house in this dusty little gallery, I see." Madeline looked exactly as Isabel remembered. Polished, calculating, and entirely insincere. It had been years since she last showed her face, even longer since she'd shown any interest in Aunt Rosalind. Yet here she was, draped in black designer mourning, holding her phone like a trophy. Isabel's voice was cool. "I didn't expect to see you here. Didn't you?" Madeline chuckled, strolling through the gallery as if she owned it. "I was told the will's being read tomorrow. Thought I'd come early and reacquaint myself with what I'm owed." "What you're owed?" Isabel repeated. "Well, let's not pretend. Rosalind always said I had a flair for business. And this place, quaint as it is, has potential. Once it's in the right hands." Isabel's jaw clenched. "You never visited her. Not once in all those years." Madeline shrugged, unbothered. "People grieve in different ways. Mine just didn't involve Wiltshire." There was something cruel in her eyes. Something rehearsed. Isabel didn't know what Madeline was really after, but her instincts were screaming. She reached into her coat pocket and felt the envelope Rosalind had left her. She hadn't opened it yet, but now, she was starting to understand why the timing mattered. As Madeline glided out of the gallery with one last smirk, the air seemed to shift. The gallery didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a battleground. And Isabel knew this storm was only just beginning. The following morning, Isabel couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that clung to her. The gallery was quieter than usual, the absence of Madeline's presence leaving a heavy weight on the air. As she sat at her desk, sorting through invoices, her eyes kept drifting to the envelope that had been left behind by Aunt Rosalind. The thick, cream-colored paper seemed to pulse with significance, as if it held all the answers she desperately needed. At precisely 10 o'clock, Isabel met the solicitor at the small office in the heart of the village. Mr. Jenkins was a man of few words. His round spectacles perched on the bridge of his nose. He had been Rosalind's lawyer for as long as Isabel could remember. His reputation for discretion was well known, and Isabel trusted him, perhaps more than anyone else in the world. She had never liked the idea of reading her aunt's will alone, but Rosalind had insisted. "You'll need to be strong for what's to come," she had said, her voice serious and steady. Isabel adjusted her scarf as she walked into the office, feeling a cold shiver run down her spine. The air inside was thick with the scent of polished wood and old leather. The solicitor's office had always felt both comforting and oppressive at the same time. It was a place where history was kept alive, but also where the past could be locked away for good. Mr. Jenkins stood up from his chair and gestured for Isabel to sit across from him. "Miss Roslyn, thank you for coming. I assume you're here to see the will." Isabel nodded, the envelope still clutched tightly in her hand. She could feel the weight of it, the finality of it pressing against her fingers. "We were waiting for you to arrive," Mr. Jenkins continued, his tone formal, but there was something in his eyes that made Isabel uneasy. "This is unusual, Miss Roslyn. Your aunt left specific instructions regarding her estate. Instructions that, well, they might come as a surprise." Isabel felt her breath catch in her throat. She had braced herself for disappointment, but she wasn't prepared for this. "I understand," she said softly, trying to keep her composure. She had no idea what to expect, but she had to know. For herself, for her future, and for the gallery that had been her lifeline. Mr. Jenkins carefully unsealed the envelope and removed a single sheet of paper. The lawyer's hands shook ever so slightly as he read the contents aloud. "To my beloved Isabel," he began, his voice steady, but his eyes darting nervously over the words. "I leave to you the gallery, the entire collection of artworks, and the house on the hill. However, there is one condition. In the event that my dear niece cannot carry on my legacy, I have named another in my stead." Isabel's heart skipped a beat. She could hardly breathe as the lawyer paused, his eyes now fixed firmly on her. What do you mean?" Isabel stammered, struggling to make sense of the words. She had never imagined that Aunt Rosalind could doubt her, not after all these years. Mr. Jenkins looked at her with sympathy, but his words cut deep. "There is another will. One that was made a few weeks before your aunt passed. It's quite different from the one you've just read." Isabel's world seemed to tilt. Another will? Had her aunt truly doubted her ability to manage everything she had entrusted to her? Was she not worthy of carrying on her legacy? Was it possible that Madeline, with all her shallow charm and selfish ways, had somehow been named in Rosalind's final instructions? You're telling me that Aunt Rosalind changed her mind?" Isabel's voice quivered as the reality of the situation began to set in. She felt sick to her stomach. Mr. Jenkins nodded, his face grave. "Yes. The second will is different. It names Madeline Roslin as the sole beneficiary of your aunt's estate. The gallery, the house, the collection, they would all go to her." The words hit Isabel like a physical blow. The gallery, the home, the history, it all belonged to Madeline now according to the second will. Isabel's mind raced as she tried to piece together the situation, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart in her ears. "No," she said firmly, shaking her head. "This can't be right. I was her family. I was the one who cared for her when she was sick. I was the one who kept this gallery alive. There's no way she could have left it all to Madeline." "I'm afraid it's true," Mr. Jenkins said softly, his voice tinged with sadness. "I wish I could offer you more comfort, Miss Roslin, but the second will is legally binding. It was signed, witnessed, and notarized just a month before your aunt's passing." Isabel felt a wave of frustration and anger wash over her. How could Aunt Rosalind have betrayed her like this? How could she have trusted Madeline, who had never even visited her, let alone shown any interest in the gallery? Suddenly, everything about the past few weeks felt like a lie. Was the love she'd shared with Rosalind real? Was she just an afterthought, someone to take care of the gallery until the right person was ready to claim it? But Isabel wasn't one to back down. Not now, not after everything she'd done. She would not let Madeline take away the only thing that had ever mattered to her. "I will fight this," Isabel said, her voice trembling but firm. "I will fight for what's mine. For what Aunt Rosalind truly wanted." Mr. Jenkins didn't respond right away, but there was a look in his eyes, something unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "I hope you're prepared, Miss Roslin. The road ahead will be difficult." But as Isabel left the office that day, a fire burned within her. She wasn't going to let this inheritance slip away without a fight. She had always known that her bond with Rosalind was special, that it wasn't about money or property. But now she would prove it, no matter the cost. Isabel's hands trembled as she processed the words. Madeline. The name rang in her ears like a bell tolling in the distance, echoing over the silence that had filled the room. The gallery, the house, the legacy, now seemingly hers, according to Aunt Rosalind's wishes. The room seemed to shrink around her, as though the walls were pressing in, suffocating her. Isabel took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The idea that Madeline could inherit everything was unbearable. The thought of her cousin, who had done little more than show up when it was convenient, taking what was hers felt like a betrayal she wasn't sure she could ever overcome. But she wasn't going to back down. Rosalind had trusted her, loved her, and given her everything. Isabel had been by her side when no one else had, caring for her in her final days, managing the gallery, keeping everything alive. To have everything taken away by someone who couldn't even be bothered to show up, who'd always been more interested in shopping than in family, was not something Isabel would allow. "I won't accept this," she declared, her voice firm and unwavering. Mr. Jenkins looked at her, his face lined with concern. "You must understand, Miss Roslyn, the second will is legally binding. It was signed, witnessed, and notarized, all in accordance with the law. There's very little that can be done to contest it without solid evidence that your aunt was not in sound mind when she signed it." Isabel's heart sank as the words hit her like a hammer. She knew that contesting a will was not a simple matter. She would need to prove that Rosalind had been coerced, or that her mental state had been compromised. But how could she do that? How could she prove something that felt so inherently wrong? "There has to be a way," Isabel muttered under her breath. She felt the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She had to find a way to fight for what was rightfully hers. She could not let Madeline, of all people, take everything from her. "I'll get you the documentation," Mr. Jenkins said after a long pause. "But I must advise you to think carefully. A legal battle could take years, and in the meantime, the gallery's future is uncertain." "I don't care about the time," Isabel replied with a fierce determination. "I'll fight for this, no matter how long it takes. I won't let Madeline destroy everything my aunt and I built together." As she left the office, the weight of the world seemed to settle on her shoulders. She had no idea what the next step would be, but one thing was clear. This battle was just beginning. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls, meetings with her solicitor, and sleepless nights. Isabel knew that time was running out. The gallery was at risk, and every day that passed without action brought her one step closer to losing everything. She dug through old family records, trying to find anything that might be useful in proving her case. Letters, photographs, even old paintings. Anything that could show how much her aunt had cared for her, how deeply their bond had been. But nothing seemed to matter. Madeline had already been named in the will. The documents were clear. Isabel's heart sank as she flipped through the papers, feeling an overwhelming sense of helplessness. That was until she stumbled across a letter, hidden in a drawer at the bottom of the filing cabinet. It was in Rosalind's handwriting, dated just a few months before her death. The letter was addressed to Isabel, though it had never been sent. It was a personal letter, one that felt as if it was meant to be read only by Isabel herself. "My dear Isabel," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then perhaps I am no longer here to guide you. I want you to know that you have always been my heart, my soul, my legacy. What I am leaving behind, what I have given to you, is not simply property or wealth. It is a reflection of my love for you, the person who has been with me through everything. You have cared for me in ways no one else could, and I have always known that you would carry my legacy forward with grace and dignity." The words hit Isabel like a wave crashing over her. Tears welled in her eyes as she read on. "Madeline may be my niece, but she has never understood the value of what we have. She has never understood the importance of family, of true love. I trust you to protect what we've built together. Isabel." "Never let her take that away from you." Isabel held the letter to her chest, her heart pounding in her ears. This was the proof she needed. This was the evidence that would show that Aunt Rosalind had intended for Isabel to carry on her legacy, not Madeline. She had to make sure this letter was presented in court, to show that her aunt had never truly wanted Madeline to take everything. Isabel left her office, clutching the letter tightly in her hand, determined to bring it to her solicitor. She knew that this was her chance to turn everything around, to fight for what was hers. This letter was her weapon, and with it, she would fight to the very end. But as she walked to her car, a cold gust of wind swept through the street. She looked up, and for a moment, her heart stopped. There, standing in front of the gallery, was Madeline. She was talking to a group of potential buyers, her fake smile wide as she gestured toward the gallery's grand entrance. The sight made Isabel's blood boil. Madeline was already trying to sell off the legacy that wasn't hers to claim. This was it. The final straw. Isabel took a deep breath, ready to take on the battle she had been preparing for. The war was far from over. Isabel's days blurred together as she continued her relentless pursuit of the truth. Every moment felt like a battle she couldn't afford to lose. The gallery, once a place of joy and memories, now felt like a cage she was trapped in, the looming threat of Madeline's hands around its future tightening with every passing hour. The letter from Rosalind gave her hope, but hope alone wasn't enough. She needed more, something that could tip the scales in her favor, something irrefutable. Late one evening, after a particularly exhausting day of legal wrangling, Isabel found herself sifting through boxes of old family documents, photographs, and artwork that had been stored away in the attic of the gallery. She had been through them once before, but this time, she was looking with a new purpose, a deeper focus. She needed to find something, anything that could prove her aunt's true intentions. The air in the attic was thick with dust, and the creaky wooden floorboards groaned under her weight as she moved from one box to the next. She pulled out old photo albums, thick with memories, each picture capturing a moment of time that was slipping further away. Her fingers lingered over the faces of family members, some long gone, others faded with age. Rosalind was in many of the photos, her smile warm, her eyes filled with a kindness that Isabel had always found comforting. It was hard to reconcile this version of Rosalind with the woman who had signed a will leaving everything to Madeline. She continued her search, moving deeper into the attic's cluttered corners. It was there, hidden beneath a pile of old art supplies, that she found what she was looking for. It wasn't much, just a small leather-bound journal, worn and faded with age. It had no markings, no title, but the moment she touched it, she knew it was important. Opening the journal, Isabel's heart skipped a beat. It was Rosalind's handwriting, unmistakable in its neat, careful style. The pages were filled with thoughts, sketches, and reflections. Most of them mundane, but one entry caught Isabel's attention. It was dated just a few months before Rosalind's death, the same time she had rewritten her will. The words on the page seemed to burn into her mind as she read them aloud to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. I have always known what Madeline is capable of. She thinks that the world owes her everything, but she does not understand the value of hard work, the sacrifices made for the things that matter. She has never understood me, or the gallery, or the love I've given to Isabel. I fear she will come for everything once I'm gone, but I know that Isabel will fight for what is rightfully hers. I trust her more than anyone else in this world. Isabel's breath caught in her throat. These were the words she had been searching for, proof that Rosalind had known what Madeline was like, and had clearly intended for Isabel to inherit everything. This wasn't just a matter of money or property. This was about love, trust, and legacy. But just as quickly as the excitement surged through her, a dark thought crept into her mind. Why had Rosalind written this in secret? Why had she not shown it to anyone else? Was there something more at play here that Isabel wasn't seeing? And if Madeline found this journal, would it be enough to convince anyone? No time for doubts, she thought. This was her chance. She closed the journal, tucking it under her arm, and hurried down the attic stairs. She had to get to Mr. Jenkins. Immediately. When she arrived at the solicitor's office, the familiar smell of polished wood and paper filled her nostrils. The tension from earlier still hung in the air, but this time, Isabel felt a sense of purpose she hadn't had before. She placed the journal on the desk, her fingers tracing its worn edges as she looked at Mr. Jenkins. This is it, she said, her voice steady. This is proof that Rosalind didn't want Madeline to have any of this. She trusted me. She left everything to me. Mr. Jenkins took the journal, flipping through its pages, his brow furrowing as he read the entry. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. You understand the implications of this, don't you, Miss Roslyn? He asked softly. This could change everything, but it could also complicate matters. If Madeline contests this journal and claims it's not valid or was written under duress, you'll be back to square one. We need more than just this. Isabel's heart sank. Of course she knew the risks. But she wasn't going to back down now. Not when she was so close. I don't care about the risks, she said, her voice firm. I will do whatever it takes to make sure my aunt's legacy is protected. This is the truth. This is what Rosalind wanted. I'll fight for it. Mr. Jenkins nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. Very well, Miss Roslyn. I'll begin preparations to present this to the court. But you should be prepared for a long and difficult battle. Madeline won't go down easily. Isabel nodded, her resolve hardening like steel. She had already come so far. She wasn't going to let Madeline tear everything apart now. As she left the solicitor's office, the weight of the journey ahead pressed on her. But she also felt something else. Hope. For the first time in days, she believed that she could win. She had the truth on her side, and she would stop at nothing to make sure that the woman who had raised her, the woman who had trusted her, would be remembered as she should be. Not just as a woman who left behind a gallery, but as a woman who loved fiercely and deeply. Her fight was just beginning, and she would not rest until her aunt's legacy was secure. The days following Isabel's discovery were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers, tense meetings, and whispered conversations in the corridors of the court. The journal had provided the ammunition she needed, but the battle had only just begun. Madeline was relentless, as always, and Isabel knew her adversary would stop at nothing to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. The tension in the air grew thick, and with each passing day, Isabel found herself at the edge of an emotional precipice. Isabel sat in the lawyer's office, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on the pile of documents in front of her. Mr. Jenkins had been working tirelessly to prepare the case, but Isabel couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The journal was powerful, yes, but would it be enough? Her thoughts were interrupted as the door to the office creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Derek, Madeline's husband, his face a picture of strained politeness. Isabel tensed, her pulse quickening. She hadn't expected him to show up, but there he was, standing in front of her, his eyes locked onto hers. "Miss Roslyn," he said, his voice smooth but laced with something darker. "I think we both know why I'm here." Isabel didn't speak for a moment, taking in his words, his presence. She knew Derek was no stranger to the games of manipulation, but he had always been more subdued than Madeline. Still, his calm facade couldn't hide the tension simmering beneath the surface. "You're wasting your time, Derek," Isabel replied, her voice firm despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "My aunt's will is clear. She left everything to me, and I will not let Madeline take it from me." Derek chuckled softly, though there was little humor in it. "Oh, I'm not here to take anything, Miss Roslyn," he said, stepping closer. "But you need to understand something. This battle is bigger than you think. The gallery, the legacy. It's all more than just a matter of inheritance. You're not the only one with a claim to it. Madeline may have had her faults, but she has just as much right to that legacy as you do." Isabel's heart sank as his words settled into her mind. Was Derek trying to guilt her into backing down? To make her believe that she wasn't entitled to what her aunt had left her? She shook her head, refusing to be swayed. "No," she said, her voice steady. "Madeline has nothing. She has always been absent, only showing up when she wanted something. You know it and I know it. My aunt chose me, Derek. She trusted me. You and Madeline. You're just looking for a way to turn this into a power struggle." Derek's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing as he took another step forward. "You don't know anything about power struggles, Isabel," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "You've always had everything handed to you, haven't you? The gallery, your aunt's affection. But there's more at stake here than you realize. And you'd be wise to remember that." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Isabel alone with the weight of his words hanging in the air. She felt a cold chill run down her spine, but she refused to let it break her. The battle was far from over, and if anything, Derek's threats only fueled her determination. Isabel didn't waste time dwelling on his words. Instead, she refocused on the task at hand. The court date was fast approaching, and she needed to be fully prepared. She had to make sure she presented her case with everything she had, no stone unturned, no detail overlooked. In the days that followed, she spent countless hours with Mr. Jenkins, going over the details of the will, the journal, and every bit of evidence they could gather. They needed to anticipate every move Madeline would make, every lie she might spin to discredit Isabel's claim. As the court date loomed ever closer, Isabel found herself losing sleep, her mind racing with possibilities. What if Madeline had something up her sleeve that they hadn't accounted for? What if the journal wasn't enough? What if the court sided with Madeline, and she lost everything? But despite the fear that gnawed at her, Isabel refused to let it consume her. She couldn't afford to back down now. She had fought too hard for this, and she wouldn't let anyone, not even Madeline and Derek, take away the legacy her aunt had entrusted her with. The morning of the court hearing arrived, and Isabel stood before the grand, imposing building, feeling a wave of both fear and resolve wash over her. This was it. The moment of truth. There was no turning back now. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The gallery was packed with people. Some curious onlookers, others there to witness the legal drama unfold. Madeline and Derek were seated at the other side, their faces a picture of controlled anger. Isabel could feel their eyes on her as she made her way to the front. Mr. Jenkins stood beside her, his usual calm presence a source of strength as they prepared for the battle ahead. Isabel took a deep breath and steeled herself for what was to come. This would be the fight of her life. And she was ready. The day of the hearing was a swirl of emotions, anxiety clinging to Isabel as she entered the courtroom. She had never imagined that her relationship with her aunt would lead to such an intricate and bitter fight. Every step she took felt heavy, as if the weight of the past was pressing down on her shoulders. She was prepared for the battle ahead, but nothing could fully prepare her for the curveballs that would be thrown her way. As she sat down in the witness box, Isabel could feel the cold, skeptical gaze of the judge resting on her. The tension in the room was palpable, everyone waiting for the first move in what was sure to be an intense confrontation. On the other side, Madeline and Derek sat together, their expressions hardened and expectant. Isabel had no illusions about the fight ahead. They weren't here to settle for anything less than total control over the legacy her aunt had left behind. Mr. Jenkins, as calm as ever, stood up and addressed the judge, his voice firm and confident. "Your Honor, we are here today to uphold the wishes of the late Margaret Roselyn, as outlined in her most recent will. This will clearly indicates that all of her assets, including the family gallery and estate, were left to my client, Isabel Roselyn, as her sole beneficiary." There was a brief silence before the judge nodded, his eyes flicking to the opposing side. Madeline's lawyer, a sharp-looking woman with a no-nonsense attitude, stood up to speak. "Your Honor," she began, "while we acknowledge that Ms. Roselyn may have had a previous will, we argue that the document in question was altered under duress, and the late Mrs. Roselyn's final intentions were not reflected in that version." Isabel's heart skipped a beat. She knew that this was the moment they had been waiting for. Madeline and Derek's only chance to discredit her claim was to paint the will as invalid, to suggest that Margaret had been coerced into changing it. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, and Isabel could feel her stomach churn. This was going to be harder than she had anticipated. She had prepared herself for the inevitable accusations, but the thought that Madeline and Derek might try to twist the truth in this way made Isabel's blood run cold. The will wasn't just a piece of paper to her. It was the final testament of her aunt's love, the culmination of years of memories and shared moments. To see it sullied in this way was an affront that Isabel couldn't tolerate. As the proceedings continued, the tension grew. The defense team presented witness after witness, each one claiming that Margaret had been confused, unwell, and incapable of making sound decisions in the final days of her life. Some suggested that the journal, which Isabel had found, was a product of her own imagination, that Isabel had fabricated it to support her claim. Isabel sat there, listening to each lie, each accusation, and yet, she remained resolute. She knew the truth. Her aunt had been more than capable of making decisions up until the very end. And if she had left that will, it was because she had wanted to. She had trusted Isabel, believed in her, and loved her in a way that was beyond what anyone else could understand. Finally, it was Isabel's turn to speak. She stood and faced the judge, the weight of her decision hanging over her like a storm cloud. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady as she began to speak. "Your Honor, I understand that the circumstances surrounding my aunt's will are complex," she began. "But I also know that the relationship I shared with her was one built on trust and love. I have lived with her for years, cared for her when no one else would, and she entrusted me with everything she had. This will was not made under duress. It was made with a clear mind, and I stand here today to honor her wishes." As Isabel spoke, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on her. Some were skeptical, others intrigued. But one thing was clear. Isabel had the truth on her side, and she wasn't going to back down. But as she looked across the room at Madeline and Derek, she saw something she hadn't expected. There was a flicker of doubt in Derek's eyes, a fleeting moment of hesitation. Was he second-guessing the strategy they had been using? Was there a crack in their facade? Before Isabel could dwell on the thought, the judge interrupted. "We will reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. to continue these proceedings. Until then, I suggest both parties refrain from making further statements." As the gavel struck, Isabel stood up, her mind racing. The hearing wasn't over, and there were still more challenges ahead. But something had shifted in that brief moment, the smallest hint of doubt. Isabel wasn't going to let it slip away. She knew that this battle wasn't just about the will, but about something far greater, the truth. And she would fight for it, no matter what it took. The following morning brought with it an unexpected twist in the courtroom. Isabel arrived, once again steeling herself for the battle ahead. She had spent the night going over the evidence, rehearsing her statements and preparing for the next round. However, little did she know, the day would bring a surprise witness. Someone who would change the entire course of the proceedings. As the session began, the judge called the next witness to the stand. A shiver ran down Isabel's spine when she saw who walked into the courtroom. It was none other than Malcolm, the family lawyer who had worked with Margaret for years. But what made this particularly unsettling was that he had been one of the few people who had remained neutral during the whole ordeal. Someone who, despite his extensive knowledge of the family's legal matters, had kept a low profile until now. Malcolm was well into his 60s, with graying hair and a demeanor that seemed more focused on maintaining order than taking sides. However, the look in his eyes when he approached the witness stand was different. He was holding something in his hand, a small, leather-bound folder. He placed it on the stand with a deliberate motion and began to speak. "Your Honor," he started, his voice low but clear, "I've been asked to testify regarding the legal intentions of Margaret Roslin, and I have something important to reveal." He paused, scanning the courtroom before his gaze settled on Isabel. "I have here the original drafts of the last will and testament, as well as a series of letters from Margaret, which indicate that she was, in fact, quite lucid and aware of her decisions." The murmurs that rippled through the room were immediate. Madeline and Derek exchanged uneasy glances, their composure cracking for the first time. Isabel couldn't believe her ears. Malcolm, the one man who had always remained silent, was now stepping forward with evidence that could prove her case. He continued, "I know there have been some concerns about Margaret's state of mind in her final days. However, I can confirm that she was fully aware of the changes she was making to her will. In fact, I was present when she signed the most recent version, and I can attest that she did so without any coercion or confusion. She was clear on her intentions." Isabel's heart swelled with a sense of relief and gratitude. She had feared that all her efforts would be in vain, but Malcolm's testimony was a game-changer. He was a trusted figure in the family, and his words carried weight. For the first time in this battle, Isabel felt the scales tipping in her favor. However, Madeline was not one to back down easily. She stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "Your Honor, we cannot rely on the testimony of this man," she said sharply. "Malcolm has been working for the Roslin family for years, and he has personal ties to this case. How can we trust that his testimony is unbiased?" Malcolm didn't flinch. He was a seasoned lawyer, well aware of the games people played in the courtroom. "I am here only to state the truth, Ms. Roslin," he replied calmly. "I have no personal stake in this matter, and I stand by my statements. My only concern is that Margaret's wishes be respected." The judge nodded thoughtfully. He was a man of few words but made them count. "I believe we have heard enough for today. We will reconvene in 2 days to discuss the next steps." With that, he banged his gavel, signaling the end of the session. Isabel left the courtroom feeling as though a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Malcolm's unexpected testimony had solidified her case, but the battle was far from over. She knew that Madeline and Derek would not go down without a fight. They would continue to try to discredit her, to sow seeds of doubt. But Isabel was no longer afraid. As she walked out of the courthouse, she found herself alone with her thoughts. The truth was on her side, and she had come this far by staying true to the woman who had raised her. Margaret had always believed in Isabel, and now, she would honor her aunt's memory by continuing to fight for what was right. Isabel's resolve hardened with every step she took. This fight was no longer just about the will. It was about reclaiming her place in her family's legacy. A legacy that had been built on love, loyalty, and unwavering trust. And no matter how difficult it became, Isabel would ensure that Margaret's voice, her wishes, and her love would be heard. The 2-day break between the last session and the resumption of the trial felt like an eternity to Isabel. Every moment was spent preparing for the final confrontation. She knew that the battle for Margaret's estate was not over, and the stakes had never been higher. Madeline and Derek would be ready to do anything to turn the tide in their favor. But Isabel's resolve was stronger than ever. As the day of the final hearing approached, Isabel met with her legal team early in the morning. The air in the conference room was thick with tension, but they were ready. Her lawyer, Christopher, had been working tirelessly to ensure every piece of evidence was perfectly in place. There was no room for error now. The culmination of months of hard work and emotional turmoil was about to play out in front of the world. "I believe we're ready," Christopher said, breaking the silence. Malcolm's testimony was crucial, And now we just need to ensure that we keep the focus on Margaret's wishes and the love she had for you, Isabel. Isabel nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up a cup of tea. I know. It's just, the closer we get, the more it feels like they're trying to erase me from this family. They want to make me seem like a stranger. Christopher placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're not a stranger, Isabel. You are Margaret's true heir. This is your fight. The last words of encouragement were exactly what she needed. They were not just fighting for money. They were fighting for a legacy of love and loyalty that had been built over years of shared memories. Isabel could feel her connection to Margaret more strongly than ever, and she knew she could not let anyone take that away. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was charged. The judge took his seat, and the proceedings began. Madeline and Derek sat across from Isabel, their faces filled with defiance. They had their last witness prepared, a so-called medical expert, who claimed Margaret's mental state was not stable in her final days. This, they argued, was why Margaret had made questionable decisions, including her choice to leave everything to Isabel. It was a weak attempt, but one that still held potential. Your Honor, Derek began, standing to present their case. We have evidence that Margaret's mental faculties were severely compromised in her final days. This expert here will testify that she was not in a state to make such an important decision as changing her will. The expert, a man in his 40s with glasses perched on his nose, stood up and presented his credentials. He went on to describe how Margaret's health had deteriorated rapidly and how, in his opinion, she was not in full possession of her faculties. Isabel could feel her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment when everything could go either way. But she refused to give in to the fear. She had already stood strong in the face of so much adversity. Now was not the time to falter. Christopher rose to his feet and began cross-examining the expert. He was calm, composed, and direct, determined to dismantle the expert's credibility piece by piece. Dr. Ellis, you claim that Margaret's mental state was compromised, but have you personally examined her in the days leading up to her passing? Christopher asked sharply. The expert hesitated for a moment. Well, no, he admitted. But based on the medical records and reports from others who were involved in her care, I believe this to be the case. Isn't it true, Christopher pressed, that you never met Margaret in person, and all of your conclusions are based on second-hand information? The expert shifted uncomfortably. I suppose that's true. Christopher's eyes narrowed. So what you're offering today is not a personal assessment but rather an opinion based on hearsay. The expert faltered, his confidence slipping away. The judge, who had been watching closely, raised an eyebrow. He was clearly not impressed. After a few more minutes of questioning, Christopher finished with a sharp, "No further questions." The courtroom was silent as the expert returned to his seat, his credibility shattered. Isabel could feel a sense of triumph building within her. It wasn't over yet, but the tide was turning. Now it was her turn. Isabel stood up, her legs slightly shaking but her heart resolute. She walked to the stand, every step a reminder of what she was fighting for. The judge motioned for her to speak. Your Honor, Isabel began, her voice steady despite the nerves gnawing at her. I stand before you today not just as a niece who is trying to claim what she believes is rightfully hers. I stand here as someone who loved her aunt deeply and who, in her final years, was the one person who truly cared for her. I was the one who stayed by her side, who made sure she had everything she needed. I was there for Margaret in ways that no one else was. Her eyes filled with emotion as she continued. I was the one who knew Margaret's heart, and I know without a doubt that the decisions she made in her will were made with clarity and purpose. She didn't choose to leave everything to me because I was a stranger. She chose me because I was the one who truly understood her. Isabel paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. I loved my aunt with everything I had, and that is why I am here today, to ensure that her wishes are respected. No one can take that away from me. The room was silent. The judge leaned forward, clearly moved by her words. Madeline and Derek were no longer as confident as they had been before. They exchanged a glance, their faces showing signs of doubt for the first time. The judge cleared his throat. I believe we've heard enough for today. We will reconvene in 2 days for the final decision. Isabel left the courtroom, her heart racing, knowing that the final chapter of this battle was just around the corner. She had said everything that needed to be said. Now she could only wait. The 2 days between the last session and the final decision felt longer than any other. Isabel tried to keep herself occupied, but her mind constantly wandered back to the trial. She couldn't help but think about the impact Margaret's estate would have on her future, but more importantly, what the decision would mean for the memory of her aunt. On the morning of the final hearing, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Isabel arrived early, hoping to clear her mind before the battle would begin again. The judge's decision was imminent, and everyone in the room knew that today would mark the end of a long and bitter struggle. Isabel, dressed in a simple yet elegant navy blue dress, sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by her lawyer Christopher and her supportive legal team. Across from them sat Madeline and Derek, their expressions grim, almost as if they knew the end was coming but refused to accept it. The tension was palpable. The judge entered the room with a solemn air, his robe flowing behind him as he took his seat. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted instantly from tense to absolute stillness. Everyone knew that this moment was the culmination of everything. The accusations, the testimonies, the emotions, and the legal arguments. "Isabel, please stand," the judge said, his voice steady. Isabel rose from her seat, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. The air seemed to thicken around her as she stood there, awaiting the judge's decision. Margaret's memory, her legacy, and everything they had fought for hung in the balance. The judge cleared his throat, looking over his papers one last time. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, the testimonies, and the arguments made by both parties, I am ready to issue my ruling. The entire courtroom leaned in, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Isabel could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was not just about money. It was about proving the truth of her relationship with Margaret. It was about the love and care she had given her aunt in her final days, when no one else had. The judge continued. I have found that the second will, signed and notarized just weeks before Margaret's passing, is indeed legally valid. The claim that Margaret was mentally compromised in her final days has not been substantiated by the evidence provided. The expert witness presented by the defense failed to demonstrate any direct examination of Margaret prior to her death, and based his opinions solely on third-party reports. Isabel could feel a rush of relief wash over her. The judge's words were a victory, but she knew this battle was far from over. The court recognizes, the judge went on, that Margaret made her decision deliberately, knowing exactly who she was leaving her estate to. It is clear from the evidence that Isabel was not only the closest person to Margaret in her final years, but also the person who demonstrated unwavering love and care. Therefore, the will stands as written, and Isabel is the rightful heir to Margaret's estate. The moment the judge's gavel hit the desk, a sense of finality swept through the courtroom. Isabel stood there, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. She had won. She had protected Margaret's legacy. But more than that, she had preserved the truth of her bond with her aunt. Isabel's eyes welled up with tears as she looked at Christopher, who gave her an encouraging smile. The courtroom was still, and for a brief moment, all that could be heard was the sound of her breath. Across the room, Madeline and Derek were in shock. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. There was nothing more they could do. The will was legally binding, and the estate was now hers. They both looked at each other in disbelief, as if trying to process how their plans had unraveled before them. But Isabel wasn't interested in gloating or rubbing their faces in the victory. This wasn't about revenge. It was about love, respect, and making sure that Margaret's wishes were honored, even if no one else could understand the depth of that love. The judge's voice broke the silence. This matter is concluded. Isabel, I trust you will continue to honor your aunt's memory and the responsibilities that come with the estate. The court is adjourned. Isabel slowly made her way out of the courtroom, feeling the weight of the decision lift from her shoulders. She had won, but there was still so much to process. The estate was hers, but it felt like there was something more important she had gained: closure. Her aunt's memory was safe, her legacy intact, and the love that had bound them together was recognized. As she stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, Isabel felt a wave of emotion flood over her. The journey had been long, and at times, unbearably difficult, but she had made it through. With Margaret's memory now protected and her inheritance secured, Isabel knew she could move forward. She had come out the other side of this battle not just as Margaret's heir, but as the person who had cared for her when no one else would. And that, in the end, was worth more than all the riches in the world.